My name is Elaine Didier, and it's a pleasure to welcome you here this evening. Tonight's program is brought to you with support from the National Archives and Records Administration, which is our parent organization, with additional support from the Ford Presidential Foundation. And it's the Ford Foundation that makes possible all of our public programs, educational outreach, research travel grants, and other events. That's the reason we're very thankful for all of you who are members of the Ford Foundation and friends of Ford, because your support makes all of these programs possible. Tonight's program is being video recorded, and when we get to the question and answer session at the end of our talk, we would appreciate it if you would go to the microphone at the rear of the center aisle, because we would like those who see the tape later on to hear your questions as well as the answers. And before we get started, that item of housekeeping, please make sure your cell phones and other electronic devices are turned off. You'd think we would all be programmed by now. Tonight's program is one of my favorite features in our educational programming because we're presenting the winner of the Ford Journalism Prize for Distinguished Reporting on the Presidency. This is an award that's been given annually for 27 years at a June event at the National Press Club in Washington. While the stipend for the award is funded by the Ford Presidential Foundation and named for President Ford, the selection of the winner is made by an independent national panel of 5 journalists and faculty members. Several of the winners have told me that they view this as the Academy Awards of journalism. In winning the 2013 prize for reporting on the presidency, tonight's speaker joins a distinguished cast of prior winners, including Peter Baker of the New York Times, who has spoken here twice, Bob Woodward of the Washington Post, Michael Duffy of Time, and many others. So it's a very elite group to join. Glenn Thrush, tonight's speaker, is the first senior staff writer for Politico magazine. Before that, he served as Politico's senior White House correspondent and its primary Obama 2012 campaign reporter. Since 2008, he has covered a wide range of assignments for Politico, including a 2-year stint running the highly trafficked Capitol Hill blog. Mr. Thrush is a veteran of Newsday and Bloomberg News and has also written long stories for the New York Times Magazine, the New York Observer, Spin, the Village Voice, and Metropolis. And I know you'll especially be interested to know that he's also written for Guitar World, where his work appeared under the byline Glenn Thrash. You ought to check that out. He has authored 2 New York Times bestseller ebooks on the 2012 campaign, Obama's Last Stand and The End of the Line. In addition to receiving the Ford Journalism Award, Mr. Thrush has received the Aldo Beckman Award for Journalism Excellence and the Merriman Smith Award for Breaking News Coverage. In selecting Mr. Thrush for the Ford Award, the judges stated, "Thrush has shown a rare ability to cultivate a unique, candid inside sources, both on and off the record, persuading them to share information that often belied the official storyline. As such, he repeatedly delivered to his readers a unique, colorful, and unvarnished account of governmental decision-making. Using vivid anecdotes and colorful detail, his reporting added vital context and detail to the public's ability to understand the inner workings of the federal government." They also noted, and I quote, "In his work product, Glenn Thrush demonstrated the very best qualities of a free press, including resourcefulness, energy, independence, empathy, and a strong sense of history." Please join me in welcoming Glenn Thrush to the Ford Presidential Library.
Thank you so much. That was really nice. Good evening, everybody. And again, I got off the plane from Washington this morning and was greeted by single digits. So, and I don't think it's getting any warmer out there last time I checked. So I really do appreciate you coming out here tonight. Thanks for inviting me, everybody. It's an honor to be here among such distinguished company, and really just great to be included in that list that you said. I don't often get mentioned in the same breath as Bob Woodward. It's a particular privilege to be associated with the Gerald Ford Library and Gerald Ford at a time when more politicians, I think, would do well to abide by President Ford's civility, his humility, his good humor, and his confidence in the process of principled compromise. On a personal note, I don't think my parents, Richard and Carol Thrush, would have ever really guessed that I would have ended up here. what with their frequent forays to the principal's office at Boyle Road Elementary School to deal with their son's various disciplinary and academic problems. So in that regard, I am doubly grateful. Look, I know I'm here to talk about the presidency, and the speech you're about to hear is going to talk, it's entitled The Hermit Presidency, and it's going to talk about the impact of both political and security concerns on really pushing the presidency behind the gates of the White House, and how I think that it doesn't really bode well for the interaction between a president and his people. But before that, I want to start my talk about covering City Hall in New York City, which was probably my favorite job in journalism. It was the fall of 2004, and the New York Yankees and the Boston Red Sox were going at it for the American League Championship. My apologies to the Detroit Tigers fans in the audience. And I was working as the City Hall reporter for Newsday on the Sunday through Thursday shift, which, as a kid from Brooklyn, which I am, was a dream job. For a political reporter covering the mayor of New York, who at this time happened to be Michael Bloomberg, the work week always began on Sunday, and when it was warm enough, the work week on Sunday began with a series of parades. Now that might sound like a boring, nothing assignment, but parades are actually the height of the political week. Because in New York City, when you stake out a parade that the mayor's at, you get a question and answer period before and after each major parade. This particular parade, as I recall, and I hope no one will fact check this because I'm not exactly sure, as I recall, it was up in the Bronx, and we had followed the mayor up there. And in the summer, and by the way, in the summer and spring in New York City, there are dozens of these parades, and oftentimes the mayor will do 5 on a Sunday, going from borough to borough to borough, and you just follow him around in a van. On this particular Sunday, we were set up for the press conference before the parade, and it was up in the Bronx. And this is the way it works. The mayor stands there with his staff. The cameras, I don't know if you've ever seen this layout, the cameras sort of form a semicircle. We call them the sticks. The cameras all in a semicircle around the mayor. And the print reporters, the lowest on the food chain, as we always are and probably always should be, we're sitting legs crossed applesauce underneath the lenses, holding up our microphones, holding up our tape recorders to the mayor. Well, I just happened to look down instead of looking up, and I noticed that the mayor of the city of New York was wearing red socks. As a tabloid reporter in New York, that was kind of a big deal. Mike Bloomberg, for those of you who don't know, is from Medford, Massachusetts, and he speaks like a Boston Red Sox fan. And it was really a sticky point for him early on in his mayoralty. And he also, at the same time, happened to be wearing a Yankees cap. So when it came my turn to ask him a question, I could have hit him on an issue of substance. I think the city budget was up at that point in time. Instead, what I said was, "Mr. Mayor, your head says Yankees, but your feet say Red Sox." He didn't respond very positively to that. He laughed his little New England laugh, which was kind of my point, right? And he headed off to his SUV. And I really didn't think much of it until the next event. And after the next event, I noticed him getting out of his SUV. His pants leg lifted up ever so slightly, and I noticed he was wearing black socks. So at that point in time, I approached his spokesman, who was a friend of mine, and I said, "What happened? What happened with the red socks?" And the guy walked over to me, lifted up his leg. And you guessed it, Red Sox. Why am I telling you this? It's a very good question. Covering the presidency is not like that at all. It is a much more distant, up-close and personal enterprise, unfortunately. We are coming up on a noteworthy, if overlooked, anniversary in the history of the White House. On May 20th, 1995, President Clinton reluctantly complied with the panel's recommendation to permanently close the 2-block stretch of Pennsylvania Avenue in front of the White House to anything except pedestrian and bicycle traffic. The decision made a lot of sense. In the fall of '94, and people forget this one, an intoxicated pilot slammed his two-seat airplane into the south lawn just under the Truman balcony. I don't know if you remember the pictures of this. It was insane. A month before Clinton made the decision to close Pennsylvania Avenue, Timothy McVeigh and his accomplices blew up the Murrah building in Oklahoma City. All told, it was a sensible decision. It had become just too dangerous to allow large trucks and buses to pass that close to the leader of the free world. In the course of the intervening 20 years, a lot of other things have happened. After 9/11, the vice tightened even more around the White House, and after last year's fence jumping incidents, tourists can't even touch the iron bars of their leader's home office without a security person telling them to let go. I have no idea what new precautions will be taken to deal with the revelations last month that a drone, again piloted by a drunk, landed on the front lawn of the White House. The issue here, though, is as we tighten the security perimeter around the White House, we lose something. And that something is access to our president. One of the first things you learn when you're assigned to cover the White House, and really you live in the White House when you're covering it, is that getting lunch is a 45-minute to 1-hour ordeal. Passing through the gate, taking the long walk up the lawn, getting outside of the official compound, out onto the street where there are restaurants. By the time that you get back, it usually takes you an hour. The distance, the physical distance between the White House and the rest of the city is vast. And you can often get the sense that the city outside and the country outside doesn't exist. And that's especially pronounced for the people who work there. You know, I don't know, all of you have watched The West Wing, but there is a real sense inside the building that you're on a ship at sea. And, you know, the Navy runs most of the core services. The Navy runs the mess, for instance, in the White House. They don't have to leave the White House for lunch. Medical personnel are provided. There's a Navy doctor on duty 24/7. I can recall sitting in the office with Jay Carney, the press secretary. He was having terrible back problems, and he left his conversation with me to go downstairs and get an injection from the doctor. You literally don't have to leave the campus, and many people in the White House don't leave the campus. It sometimes seems as if the outside world doesn't exist, except in terms of abstraction and presenting the president with problems. To some extent, we inter our presidents in a gilded, guarded mausoleum, and then we wonder why they seem so out of touch with the American people. President Obama has made attempts, and I think laudable attempts, to sort of cut that distance down. He is no George H.W. Bush. This is a guy who knows how to operate a supermarket censor. He also, during the 2008 campaign, would often push his staffer out of the driver's seat of the SUV so that he could get behind the wheel. When I covered him on Capitol Hill before he was elected, it wasn't uncommon to run into him in the Senate snack bar, buying a cup of coffee or, you know, having a late salad because he didn't have time to go out. And when he came to office, he had every intention of maintaining a degree of middle-class normalcy. He coached his kids' basketball team. He made and still makes occasional unscheduled forays to Starbucks, just up the block from the White House, and him and I go to the same bookstore, Politics and Prose. But as the years have gone by, he too has become a prisoner of his office in this ridiculous hermetic isolation inside the castle tower of American democracy, the White House. I witnessed this firsthand in the fall of 2011, when Obama gamely went on this bus trip through North Carolina and Virginia in hopes of reconnecting with the American people. This was a time right after the Tea Party insurgents, when his approval rating really dipped below 45% for the first time, and there was a real sense that he had become disconnected from the people who had elected him. The president's motorcade would roar into each town like an invading armor column. And while he got some valuable face time with the regular people, the stifling security requirements got in the way more often than not. This was the top of the story that I wrote at the time. The moment that best defined Barack Obama's 3-day bus tour came on the last day, as the president stood indecisively between Anna's Pizzeria in Hampton, Virginia, and an unwelcoming wall of security vehicles. Obama and the First Lady had just had lunch with 4 veterans. quietly discussing their struggle to find jobs after coming home from Iraq and Afghanistan. He was about to hop aboard the armored motor coach when he spied a dozen or more cheering supporters beckoning him to come up the block. He paused, seeming to ponder the logistics of sprinting right over. He waved, smiled, he waved again. Then, as the thought bubble, nah, seemed to pop into the presidential cranium, Obama disappeared up the steps of his bus, leaving behind disappointed fans and a missed opportunity on a trip that was full of missed opportunities. Obama is clearly frustrated by this dynamic. He clearly feels trapped in the job, in the same way that George W. Bush talks so much about being trapped in the job. Another anecdote, another story from a year later. In October 2012, just after, you guys remember Obama's performance in the first debate, October 3rd in Denver. I would say suboptimal would have been the description that a lot of people in the White House would have used to it. He was really, really depressed. He put on a brave face for a lot of his staff, but subsequent reporting that I did, people said that he was very, very, very down. Well, Robert Gibbs, who was his first press secretary, and a guy who really understood the president's psyche as well as any aide, came up with an idea to get him out of the dumps. Quietly, without Obama's knowledge, Gibbs got permission from the Secret Service to drive his new electric Chevy Volt onto the South Drive behind the White House. Halfway through a previously scheduled meeting in the Oval Office, Gibbs ushered Obama outside, handed him the keys, and let the leader of the free world drive a car 3 times around the grounds, but only 3 times. Obama was thrilled, kind of like a kid hopping on his bike after being locked in the house with the flu. It's a charming story, but it's also a little bit pathetic. There are, of course, very good reasons to keep the President of the United States in a locked box. Chief executives who venture out into crowds have routinely been rewarded with riots or assassination attempts, as President Ford himself discovered when he was confronted by Squeaky Fromm's pistol just for the crime of shaking people's hands in Sacramento 40 years ago. And other presidents, going further back in history, have nearly been killed by kindness. One example that really pops to mind was Andrew Jackson's inauguration in 1829 when he invited anyone who wanted to come into the White House. That was the first and last time that was tried. Let me read you this description from a contemporary observers. Ladies fainted. Men were seen with bloody noses, and such a scene of confusion took place as is impossible to describe. Those who got in could not get out, but had to scramble out of windows. At one time, the president, who had retreated and retreated until he was pressed against the wall, could only be secured by a number of gentlemen forming around him and making a kind of barrier with their own bodies. To get into the White House now, citizens have to wait months for a ticket. To see Obama in the flesh, you can go to a speech with 10,000 of your closest friends. Or if you're a campaign supporter, you can pay a few grand and pose with him for 30 seconds for a picture. Or, and this is the one that has always bothered me, you can enter a raffle sponsored by his campaign or his campaign operation, Organizing for America, and win a dinner with him and Michelle Obama, kind of like the toaster or the weekend in Vegas you'd get from your church raffle. Such a premium is placed on being in the presence of the president that I think people forget oftentimes that it is their right as American citizens to have access to somebody they elected to run the country. And it's not just the physical sequestration of the presidency that creates this sense of isolation. This is a job that grays and ages everyone in it. The pressures and workload of the office, its power, the overwhelming sense of personal responsibility eventually separates every president from even their most trusted staffers. In the 1860s, anyone with a pair of shoes could walk right into the White House and try to buttonhole the President of the United States. But was there ever a president who felt so alone as Lincoln? Lesser presidents feel no less pressure. As my friend Peter Baker, an earlier recipient of this award, has pointed out, George W. Bush came to realize by his second term he could only rely on himself. And that was transformative. When he realized that it was his presidency and it wasn't shared with Dick Cheney or anyone else, he really got down to the business. It's really the untold story that Peter tells of the Bush presidency. He took command of the presidency, and the last 2 years of his presidency were the best governed. This also explains why sitting presidents almost invariably are drawn to their predecessors more than anyone for comfort and support. President Obama, I am told, for instance, has gradually developed an appreciation for the pressures that were on Bush and even some of the decisions that he made. And I covered the 2008 race. President Obama did not have a high impression of President Bush at that period in time. And George W. Bush, for his part, unlike Dick Cheney, has refrained for the most part from publicly criticizing Obama, although it's clear that he disagrees with him on most every public foreign policy decision that President Obama has made. But the more important point here, there's lots of historical and institutional factors, but the truth is the presidency is receding from our view because of politics, the way we do politics in the 21st century. And also, it's about the kind of politician that thrives in this hyper-partisan social media cultural maelstrom. The only way to live through this sort of era is to detach yourself. Barack Obama's great asset as a candidate was his cool, was his capacity to ride above the stupidity and conflict of any given day on the campaign. I covered Hillary Clinton at the time. It drove the Clinton people crazy. Obama had the capacity to sort of step back even as his minions were playing very hardball politics. The problem, though, is not rooted in the temperament of any one president, but in the nature of the politics that we're practicing today. Over the past 20 years, candidates, at least the ones that win, have moved away from the broad stroke view of American politics that prevailed from the 1960s to the 1990s. In the past, the conventional wisdom held that a national candidate had to appeal to swing voters, and you guys live in a swing state. The notion was that you had to win that sliver, typically between 3 and 7% of the American population, typically white, middle, and working class people in the Midwest, in order to win national elections. And national elections were really run that way. Well, there has been a revolution in the last 20 years, and that revolution has really become more acute in the last 10. The sense now is, driven by strategists like Matthew Dowd on the Republican side and David Plouffe for the Democrats, campaigns are increasingly focused on moving inward, not outward. The goal these days is to energize the base of their parties, people who already agree with the president or the presidential candidate, by targeting poll testing issues that motivate core conservatives and liberals. To do this, campaigns employ an integrated digital strategy and microscopically target selected groups of voters and figure out how to get them to the polls. Campaigns rate their individual voters' likelihood now of voting the same way your Weather Channel app estimates the chances it'll snow on Sunday. What does this mean for the presidency, and what does this mean for democracy? Well, leaders, even ones with lofty, heartfelt, bipartisan aspirations like George Bush and Barack Obama, and remember, both of them ran on promises to be more bipartisan, they're just not able to bridge the divide. And they gradually inexorably end up, increasingly speaking to the people who want to hear what they have to say. Whatever their original intentions, they come to view things in the same binary terms that are imposed upon them from without in this Fox versus MSNBC world. They're egged on by their pollsters and by the troll armies of Twitter, Facebook, and whatever new platform was invented last week. You are for me or you are against me. I don't need to provide examples of how the mainstream and partisan media stoke this fire. It's too damn depressing. I would have to stop my speech right now. But when you see President Obama open up the doors for a long sit down with an interviewer, consider who he's talking to and why he's talking to that person. And ask yourself, why did he pick this particular person to bare his soul to? Chances are it's somebody he expects to get a good shake from. He is not speaking to somebody who is going to spring surprises upon him. I remember very vividly a series of interviews Bill Clinton conducted shortly after his election in 1992. How he lamented how his new job made it even harder for him to keep in touch with the dozens and dozens of local, state, and federal officials he routinely called as governor of Arkansas. He also fretted about being kept away from regular voters, notwithstanding that famous Saturday Night Live skit. Do you guys remember this, where he would jog into a McDonald's and eat everybody's French fries? But the truth of the matter is Bill Clinton particularly after the Lewinsky and impeachment scandals, withdrew into the presidency himself. And while he always maintained contact with members of Congress far more than his successors, he too became something of a prisoner of the office. Suffice it to say that the White House creates a powerful filter that blocks out all but the most positive inputs. And by design, it constricts the flow of people and information around a president. That is the job chiefs of staff and senior advisors at the White House have these days. There is such an amount of information, such a press of people who want to influence the president. Senior advisors around the president are in the information flow business. They essentially exist as gatekeepers to keep things from getting through to the president. David Plouffe, the most influential advisor Obama has ever had, calls it, quote, screening out the noise, end quote. And during the 2012 campaign, I wrote a story detailing how Plouffe personally ordered his boss to ditch his iPad because he thought Obama was obsessing too much about outside details. And this, more than anything, really, I think, is one of the things that leads to isolation. It's about cutting down the number of inputs. And I think you're going to see over the course of the next couple of years, hopefully, people really redesigning the presidency in a way that makes it more of a 21st century institution, a way to deal with the flow of information so that you're not blocking out people, ideas, or information that otherwise might influence the presidency in a positive way. But we haven't yet figured out how to do that. And David Plouffe, who is an enormously gifted advisor, will admit now that he shut down far too much of the inputs that the president should have gotten. In a piece I wrote about Obama's cabinet a little over a year ago for Politico magazine, I documented the gradual tightening of this consultation vice and Obama's habit, which is accelerated in his second term, of vesting power in the hands of very few people, like Plouffe. Quote, 5 years on, I wrote, Obama's White House still reflects these priorities. At the top is a stripped-down command cluster modeled on his campaign, ruled by ferocious gatekeepers. But Obama has also created in the White House an intellectual cloister where he could spitball ideas with academics like Larry Summers or take a few hours, as he did in the middle of the 2012 campaign, to discuss issues like civility and social media with a small group of hand-picked tech titans. Yet his unwillingness to empower his cabinet, and this applies, by the way, to his general reluctance to consistently consult members of Congress, speak freely with the press, talk to local government officials, trade unions, or business people, has not been without consequence. To many of the people I spoke with on that story, it is both a reflection and a cause of the administration's lurching improvisational character. Limiting the number of new voices in Obama's inner circle has given it a cramped, sometimes predictable feeling, and increased the pressure on a diminishing cast of indispensable staffers who are now burning out and breaking down. Never have the strains been more apparent than during the troubled, ill-coordinated rollout of Obamacare. To his credit, shortly after I wrote that story, Obama did clean house, and he brought in former Clinton Chief of Staff John Podesta, who was responsible, almost single-handedly responsible, I think, for rescuing the second term through a flurry of controversial executive actions, the most famous of which is the immigration decree. But Podesta and another regarded add-on, Ron Klain, the Ebola czar, are preparing to make their exits, and it's not entirely clear how Obama plans to replace them or whether or not he plans to widen his circle. It's hard to see him filling the place up with new people. This is not a man who has made a ton of friends in Washington. In fact, one of the most famous quotes about Obama came from Michelle Obama, who said, in fact, that they set out not to make new friends in Washington. But beyond Obama, the increasing distance between the White House and the lives of regular people, that's the thing that worries me most personally. I happen to be an American person. And I grew up in a working class background, with a working class background, and the issues that often bounce off the White House that are talked internally as communications issues or as abstract policy concerns have, in my life, been extraordinarily personal. And I think most Americans, when they sort of look at the White House and they look at politics in general, feel that American politics doesn't address their core anxieties or their belief that government should have a positive role, not overwhelming role in their life. I haven't studied the political or managerial science of it all, But you tell me, is it healthy to have a president who is disconnected from the real lives of his or her people? I don't really know how to answer this question, but having covered both the Obama presidency and 2 of his campaigns, I was aware of a time when he did it better, when he listened to people more, when it seemed like what was going on in the country had a more direct impact on the way that he governed. When he was a candidate in 2007, he was such a long shot. He would talk to anybody. He even talked to me. He made a point of staying in cheap hotels, and he made a point of hanging out in the bars in the cheap hotels. He would work out in one of, I remember actually walking in, I think it was on Floor Drive in Iowa, walking into one of those terrible, I don't want to name the chain, but like one of those terrible low-ceilinged workout rooms with 2 treadmills, and Barack Obama was on one of them, and I decided then that I was going to go get a cup of coffee. He was a really good listener. In fact, if you play back some of his early speeches, you will hear an emotional quality to them that you don't hear in his current speeches. And this guy still gives a pretty good speech. There was also a lot more call and response. He would get interrupted a lot in a lot of these speeches, I remember, particularly again in Iowa and New Hampshire. And there was a certain sense that his mission was dovetailing with the anxious mood of the country during those opening days of the economic crisis. Many times since, especially as he struggled to sell Obamacare to a skeptical middle America, I wondered how different things would have been if he hadn't viewed selling it as an unsavory exercise and an excuse to deliver long speeches. What if he'd adopted the same approach that he had in the 2007-2008 period? Had gone out into the country, talked and listened and explained. Then figure out a communication strategy from Washington. Then put very polished aides like Joel Benenson as pollster and David Axelrod as message man on the job. That's the way it worked when he was most successful. Obama led the way and the advisors followed. Towards the end of his presidency, it has been exactly the opposite. Would he have changed the fundamental dynamic? Would he have tamped down the anger of the Tea Party? I don't know, maybe not. But he would have had a better idea of where it was coming from and a better idea of how to come up with counter strategies. I'm going to say something here that surprises a lot of people. Hillary Clinton, in my view, was even better on the trail in 2008 as a retail campaigner than Barack Obama was. Obama gave better speeches, but Hillary one-on-one was far more impressive, but only after she had fallen off of her perch as a frontrunner in early 2008. It was then, with no other options, that she fell back on what she knew how to do best, listening. Remember, her main innovation that she has given to modern American politics is the listening tour. This was the device that she used when she was running for the Senate in New York State in 2000, and it was extraordinarily effective, not just because it was a PR strategy, but because it really fits Hillary Clinton's personality. If you've been around her when she's unmanaged and sort of unvarnished, she has a staff-level quality about her. She's interested in things. She actually walks around or will grab a notebook from an aide and start jotting down notes. I remember flying into New Orleans with Hillary and a New York Times reporter a couple of weeks after Katrina, and we were walking along the ruined berm opposite the lower Ninth Ward. That big barge was still there. And she was talking to the head of the Army Corps of Engineers, who was explaining to her how they were going to rebuild this. And Ray Hernandez, the other reporter, and myself were craning in, just trying to hear what they were saying to each other. And Hillary had grabbed a notebook and was taking notes, and seemed to be writing numbers down, which blew our minds, like weight loads and stuff. And I had never seen her get as angry with reporters as she did with me and Ray. She told us she said, "Get the hell out of here." She really was interested in hearing what they had to say. The other thing I really remember about Hillary Clinton, one of my most vivid memories of 2008 were a series of these gut-wrenching roundtable discussions in Ohio and Nevada over foreclosures and job losses at the leading edge of the economic collapse. Again, I just remember her sitting there taking notes as if she was a caseworker. She asked people how to spell their names. She shook every hand, took every picture. Eventually, she learned how to speak for people as opposed to speaking at people. And again, I think listening was the key. In general, I think politicians, and this would be a good rule of thumb for the 2016 crowd, I think they would do well by giving fewer speeches and spending more of their time listening to what people have to say to them. But right now, if you look at Hillary, she seems to have unlearned all the lessons of 2008. The once and future presumptive Democratic nominee is sitting in the confines of two mansions, one in D.C. and one in Westchester County, New York, talking to a small cadre of trusted aides about how she is going to win over the American people. It's remarkable to me. Here you have a woman whose race will be run on empowering the powerless, restoring a sense of equity for middle and working class people, and she's serving a self-imposed prison sentence in a gilded cage, emerging only in the last few months to collect six-figure speech fees or to show up at celebrity galas. Why not another listening tour? She invented it. Would the world really turn upside down if Clinton suddenly showed up to tour a child care center in Detroit? If she decided to confound the national press by secretly, walking around the empty houses in Florida, Nevada, and Arizona that remain empty 7 years into the foreclosure crisis? How can anyone possibly understand the problems of working people if you don't know any damned working people? I'd like to conclude by talking about reporters who, after all, are the very damnedest of all working people. In the 4+ years I've covered President Obama, I've gotten close enough to see the color of his socks only a few times. And even then, I've never been given the opportunity to ask him about it. In the course of all these years I've covered him, with the exception of the times I was assigned to pool duty, that's when a small group of reporters breaks off and covers him at various events and then reports back to the rest of the press corps. I've never been allowed to ask Barack Obama an on-the-record question. My friend and colleague at Politico, Todd Purdom, who covered the White House many years for the New York Times, he was the model for the Timothy Busfield character in The West Wing, in fact. When he found I'd taken over the White House beat for Politico, he said, "Hey, did you get your get-to-know, sit-down meeting with the president in the Oval Office yet?" And I said, "What?" I wasn't aware I got one of those. When I told him no, he was astonished. President Clinton had made it a regular practice, he explained, of meeting with reporters who had just been assigned to the beat. As a courtesy, yes, but also as a way to charm the hell out of them. I did not receive such a charm letter. In fact, my requests for even a single question at a presidential press conference were casually dismissed. When I asked for a one-on-one interview with the president, the result was laughter. The reasons for stonewalling me changed over the years. I was told, candidly, and I was thankful for this, that I was too unpredictable and might embarrass the president with a personal question. My organization, I was later informed, represented all the worst inside baseball instincts of Beltway journalism. And why would the President of the United States want to validate our existence by giving us a question in public? During the 2012 campaign, I was banned simply because I didn't represent a constituency that Obama wanted to win. I wasn't MSNBC, I wasn't the Huffington Post, the New York Times, or the Spanish language press. They wouldn't even let me cash in an old IOU. During the 2008 campaign, President Obama, then Senator Obama, was upset with a story I'd written about his unwillingness to embrace the issue of gay, lesbian, and transgender rights. He had read the article, he was angry with it, and then he approached me at an event in Los Angeles, pulled me aside, and actually, if any of you go to my Facebook page, my photographer was there and has the picture. It's pretty funny. He leaned into my ear and he said, "Thrush, man, we need to get a beer and talk this through." Well, I'm still waiting, Mr. President. Thank you very much.
Don't be shy. Questions?
I was interested in your term mausoleum before, and you certainly explained the dearth or death of ideas. So I kind of have a two-part question. First of all, how much of an impact, Obama reads what, certain number of letters every night or something like that. Do you think that, have you seen any kind of effect on that? And kind of secondly, as a solution, maybe do more of that, what would be some other things he could do? And maybe thirdly, should he fire Valerie Jarrett?
I'll start with the third question first. I don't think you should fire Valerie Jarrett because I think Valerie Jarrett doesn't occupy the space that a lot of people assume that she does. I think there is this perception. It's funny, I had an interview with a leading House Republican a couple of weeks ago, and this person knew that I had worked in the White House for a while, pulled me over to the side and said, "Hey, does Valerie Jarrett really run the country?" And I said, "No, I don't think she does. I think she's had some impact on things, but I think she's a kitchen cabinet aide. She's somebody who has had some influence on particular policy areas, particularly kind of on some of the financial regulation stuff. She was a big supporter of Elizabeth Warren's, for instance, but I do not think Valerie occupies a large enough space that her presence or absence would necessarily change things." What was your first two?
Well, about the reading letters.
Oh, yeah.
What are other things he could do?
This is the biggest fight I have with my wife. I think it's the craziest thing, the 10 letters. So for those of you who don't know, and there was a wonderful book written about it, the president has randomly selected for him every night, or used to be every night, 10 letters from regular Americans to sort of understand what their plight is. And he reads them and he gives them very thoughtful responses. I think the impulse is, I mean, how can you disagree with the impulse? But this is also a president who doesn't necessarily seek out people in the flesh. So I think to a certain extent it reflects his peculiar mindset, which is he wants to understand what people are going through, but he doesn't necessarily want to have the kind of extended contact with them. The thing I was really struck with this week, and no one really noticed this really didn't become a story. Dennis McDonough, the White House Chief of Staff, who really is Obama's alter ego at this point, they're inseparable, took 2 days off of work, flew out to San Francisco, and personally participated in the San Francisco census of the homeless. I mean, so there is a spirit within the White House for people to really understand what's going on outside. I think, I've thought, that question that you just posed, I've thought about a million times. Like, what modalities can you use to kind of get him out there? And all that I can think of is, you could bring more groups of people in. But I do think getting him out there and just in situations where he's sitting around and having in a diner with people and talking with them just as much as possible. I just think there's really never, there are a lot of different competing equities in the White House, a lot of people with different agendas. Very few people in the White House have that as a priority. How do you keep him in touch with the American people?
Hi, thank you for your talk. Very, very interesting. Kind of piggybacking on what you're saying there, I was interested in knowing if you're aware of who does have access to the president from the outside, aside from his circle of advisors. And I have the impression that you have to carry a lot of weight. You have to be, wealthy, rich, head of a major corporation. And I also wonder if lobbyists have access to the White House as much as they do on Capitol Hill.
Again, I think the president, I'll answer the last part first too. The president has had a ban on lobbyists. In fact, to a certain extent, I think you could say that in terms of good government, that's been something he's been fairly consistent on. He's waived it a few times, but there's very little, as far as I can discern, and maybe this is a subject for better investigative reporting, but there's been very little contamination on that. The question of sort of who does he talk with, I think what's really interesting, last time I was in this area was with Joe Biden. For a long time, Barack Obama wasn't seen within the confines of Detroit. I guess he made a trip late last year here. But Biden was the guy who would come here. And in many instances, he's outsourced this function to Joe Biden. Biden, for all the roles that he plays and all the criticism that he gets, Biden really does play that outreach role for the president. And a lot of the outside people that have been brought into the administration, both staff and external voices, have literally been ushered into the Oval Office by Biden. There was one famous incident that I wrote about a couple of years ago that really got the president quite angry at the vice president. During, I guess this was the debate over the abortion provision in the ACA, the vice president just walked Cardinal Dolan of New York right into the Oval Office when the president was sitting there either on the phone or writing papers. You don't do that to the president of the United States. And it really ticked Obama off, but it also illustrates it illustrates the degree to which Biden is, I think, the person in his circle that tends to inject outsiders inside.
So does that speak to the personalities? Joe Biden is much more of a easygoing, people person, and the personality of Obama seems to be somewhat more distant.
You see, but I also think like one of those guys got elected president, and it wasn't Joe Biden. I think, yes, I do think it has a lot to do with the personalities, but I think we as the American people, if you kind of look at the folks that we're electing lately, we tend to go for that kind of a personality. I mean, George W. Bush could work a room like nobody's business. So can Obama, by the way. Have any of you been in the presence of the president, like in a small... He's very charming. He's an extraordinarily charismatic guy. But his fundamental political personality is cool and detached. And I think George W. Bush was the same way too. I think in this overheated environment, those are the kind of people that people are attracted to.
Do you know why the president has sort of dropped raising the minimum wage?
Can I ask you a personal question?
What?
Can I ask you one personal question?
Yes.
Where are you from?
Where what?
Where are you from originally?
Originally?
Yeah.
From the Bronx, New York.
Yeah, I had a feeling.
That's God's country if you don't know it.
One other personal question. What high school did you go to?
No comment.
Oh, okay.
I'm under the God protection.
Okay, all right. I'm sorry. Later for you. What was the question again?
You got a hearing problem like I do.
Yeah.
Why did the president hear the minimum wage? He hasn't kept that up, because when you analyze the fact that inflation over the years of the minimum wage makes the minimum wage now like $3 an hour, and why he would not be pushing that to help the American people.
It was a centerpiece, if not the centerpiece, of his State of the Union. He's not going to get it done federally given the opposition. It is a great issue. It's actually a tremendous gift for Hillary Clinton in terms of an issue. And the other aspect here politically is it's actually working out better for the National Democrats and the White House to have this be litigated state by state. Because Democrats have been, one of the untold stories of the last 10, 15 years, Democrats have been destroyed at the state house level, as Democrats here and, in other parts of the Midwest know. And this really is an issue. The thing about the minimum wage that makes it a unique issue is a majority of Republicans, registered Republicans, are in favor of a minimum wage increase. And that is the rarest of all economic issues. So the answer is he's trying, he's making it a rhetorical issue, and Democrats are generally thankful that this is being fought out in individual states. You better be from the Bronx.
I'm not from the Bronx, Midwest. No chief executive of any major corporation or even of the free world can micromanage and be effective. So they're going to be very, very dependent upon those people around him. And you alluded to the fact that there's a lot of people in the White House with different agendas. So how does the president get control of his agenda and manage to what he wants to do? And hopefully that's in concert with what the American people want.
I have no idea. No. Look, I think in general, this is my hobby horse. I mean, like, the story that I've worked longest on was the story on the cabinet called Locked in the Cabinet. I urge you guys to read it. Really discusses, it's really interesting. It's on its surface, it's a story about Obama's mismanagement of the cabinet, but it's really about the structure of the presidency in the 21st century. I mean, the presidency itself as an institution is very similar to the White House. It's a building that was not designed to accommodate this. And I think the structure of the presidency, the fact, for instance, you know, it was no mistake that Dick Cheney occupied such a large role in the Bush administration. There's simply too much work, too many decisions that need to be made for one president to make all of those decisions. I think that is clear at this point in time. I think Hillary's outsized role in the Clinton administration proved that as well. And I think Biden's role, you know, Biden is not a joke. You know, his favorite show is Veep. It's actually, I think, the best political show that's ever been on. But the truth of the matter is he's a really vital part of this administration. So in answer to your question, we've done millions of management studies about small business, big business, school management, right? Restaurant management. How come there is not a lively field looking at presidential management? I mean, why are we wedded to these sort of 19th century and mid-20th century forms with chiefs of staff and deputy chiefs of staff? I think it would be a really cool exercise for some magazine or someone to sponsor a competition for redesigning the presidency in a way that makes more sense in the context of the way that information and decisions have to be made right now. I just don't think you can continue to retrofit this Edsel.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to follow up on that point, and it seems to me as an outsider, I've noticed that as as Obama's presidency has gone forward, and he has these limited points of information that gets in, he makes major substantive changes in policy rules at the last minute, and it tends to create a lot of anxiety in the country because people get marching down one direction in implementing a policy, and at the last minute, there's a change. And I give you as an example the story that was in the New York Times last week about, you know, we're now in February in the middle of a tax filing season, and the administration is thinking about changing the penalty calculations on the tax returns for all the American public. And that just, the chaos that creates throughout the whole country. And it seems like those examples get greater and greater and greater the farther in we get to the presidency. And I'm wondering if part of that jerkiness is because he's getting less access to information about timely implementation to begin with.
Well, I think, you know, if you want to talk about the Obamacare thing, we could spend 3 hours on that. But I think another thing that's really happening right now, we saw the departure of Dan Pfeiffer, one of his senior advisors, this week, and Jen Palmieri's communications advisor. That's a pretty empty building. When I was first covering this place, it was a Renaissance fair of, you know, brilliant dysfunction, right? I mean, you had some extraordinary characters here. Even if you didn't like them personally or agree with them from a policy standpoint, Rahm Emanuel was a major character. You know, you had Larry Summers, who is a, you know, I won't use the term monster, neither pejoratively or negatively, but he occupied a tremendous amount of space. You had Tim Geithner, the Treasury Secretary, who was a titan, who will be remembered for a long time. You had Bob Gates at Defense. You just had, the building was full, chock full of incredibly smart, incredibly ambitious, incredibly motivated people. It is tumbleweeds now. I mean, you really do not have, it is not a nexus for talent, and it is not a nexus for ambition. I think that is, so when you start seeing some of these things falling by the wayside, I think a lot of this has to do with empty nest syndrome. Thank you very much.
Now you can see why he won the Ford Journalism Prize for coverage of the presidency. And what we have for you, in honor of your lovely remarks about President Ford, are a pair of pens with Gerald Ford's signature. And we hope you will use them to write in good health and great style and great intelligence. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Great to have you.